The Dros rapist remains behind bars and will be back in court next week. It's believed he violated a 7-year-old little girl in a restaurant on Sunday. Many across Twitter and Facebook have published what they believe to be the accused's name and photo. We can't do that, and SABC News has released details online of why we cannot legally do that until he has appeared in court. Not only appeared, but has been asked to plead guilty or not. Footage has also been shared, believed to be the man, an angry restaurant patron, shortly after the child was found. His chest is full of blood. The issue has sparked claims of racism on social media since he is white. A tweet claiming that rape is not a part of white culture, sparking outrage. We showed you that earlier, linked to our thought of the day, asking for your comments. To discuss the psychology around paedophilia, this sort of gross, unbelievable, brutal attack, as well as the anger that has led to those claims, we're joined by clinical psychologist Hayden Knibbs. Thank you for being with us, Hayden.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Where do we start? I guess what possesses a man to behave like this?
Yeah, very difficult to say because there's no, strictly speaking, proven linear causality. It is not as though an upbringing of a certain type results in this. I will rather say, if we break it down, when it comes to this type, if we say the Dros rape incident, we're talking about a young child and an adult male. In that instance, classically, most of the time we're looking at what you rightly refer to as paedophile or paedophilic disorder. In that sense, we have a sexual attraction to prepubescent children. If we look at sexual development, this will be in some way a conditioned response. So somehow through the path of this individual's life, assuming that this is what we're observing here, there will have been a conditioning of an attraction of that kind towards a child.
So some men attracted to young children, but the question is, can they control it?
Yes, it is. I will say it is a conditioned attraction. So
they can't help that?
Well, that's also very
How
grey.
much choice is there in that? Yeah.
We are not talking about a behavior that is impulsive, a behavior that is out of the ability to limit oneself for it. The same way that a heterosexual adult will be attracted to the opposite sex, they can control what they do. It is not a matter of an inability to understand what one is doing. The wrongfulness can be appreciated, if we're looking at legal terms, and the ability to act in accordance. The paedophilic disorder diagnosis on its own does not limit that.
He apparently stalked his prey. I mean, the eyewitnesses saying he was watching. Is that sort of normal behavior? What sort of cases have you seen? And very calculated, waiting for her to go to the bathroom, following afterwards.
Yeah. There we see parts of, if we can refer to the modus operandi, how in this instance he is playing it out. I will say, as far as the crimes that mimic this, will be that the victim is a stranger. That's my understanding of the accused instance. Typically that I would say is in the minority of it. Most of the times when it comes to child rapes, it is actually somebody known to the child.
There's claims that he may use the insanity plea, and I guess that's where it comes in. Surely nobody in their right mind would attack a little child like this. It doesn't seem normal. But Not In My Name SA, a group, is saying they won't accept an insanity plea. Is that just too easy, what we're talking about, choices?
Well, clinically speaking, it would not fit into the requirements. When we're talking about the psychological picture of an individual that is putting the insanity plea, my understanding in South Africa it's called pathological incapacity or non-pathological criminal incapacity. But in that essence, what you're saying is that due to whatever the psychiatric condition is, you have an inability to appreciate the wrongfulness of the behavior, or an inability to act in accordance with the understanding of the wrongfulness. So this would mean that the person is in an instance that they literally cannot understand what they are doing. And if they actually can understand it, they literally cannot stop themselves from acting in accordance with that. So we are more talking, if you see me as a lion and you shoot me, and you can prove this, you had no idea you were killing a human, then you cannot be held accountable for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so in most cases people can control their behavior. That's the point here. Let's move to the little girl whose life we know will be profoundly affected. You've looked at trauma. Just give us some idea of the ramifications of something like this.
If we look at this picture in its entirety, we have an individual within a bathroom in a public setting, or I will have to use the term allegedly, but there we have it. If that is the case, this is likely to be very traumatic for the victim. We are talking about a very unexpected situation, and it is of such a nature that it is almost impossible to predict the nuances of what the impact will be, but it is highly likely to create a lot of psychological damage. That is not to say that it cannot be dealt with, it cannot be therapeutically assisted, but it will likely have quite a strong impact.
What about the family? I mean, there can be guilt here, there can be people even around who may or may not have intervened. They could look back. I mean, everybody affected.
Absolutely. It is actually quite a huge ripple effect. If you imagine for a moment, if you are a parent and your child right in front of you is victimized in such a horrendous way, it almost speaks to a subjective feeling of impacting directly on your role of what you're attempting to do. There could be very strong feelings of guilt, even skewed but possibly self-blame. It is a very difficult thing to hold. Going forward, how does one then continue in the world? What does one do with one's child? How much do we try and protect after that? The potential ripple effect is actually dramatically big.
It's got even bigger because now it's become a societal issue. How do you think this became about race?
This one is such a difficult, delicate psychological mechanism that we are beginning to tiptoe around when looking at that question. And it really does involve elements of group dynamics. And in fact, research shows us even talking about it is likely to elicit a little bit of anxiety within viewers, for argument's sake.
Talking about race?
Yes, because of the nature of the two groups, the group dynamics. I will rather say...
Well, let's just stop there. I mean, as a white woman, when I saw that tweet talking about white culture, it's very difficult dealing with the anger, is difficult. How do you feel as a white man?
I will rather say that in my role as a clinician, I'm attempting to observe behavior objectively in all of its facets. And in that regard, I'm aware that there is such a deep pain when it comes to the path that individuals have walked regarding issues such as this. And that because of it, and what we see in group dynamics classically, if a group is threatened, we pull closer. And this incident is so threatening to almost every individual because it is so unexpected, the way that it has occurred, if we can say the modus operandi, the way that it occurred so quickly in such an impactful way. There will be very few people that would go to a restaurant and expect to have to watch their children and protect them. In that sense, it becomes such a threat, and people, a very normal reaction is an attempt to explain it away, that protects us again. Something that can no, it keeps me safe, it's distant. It is something different from what I'm facing.
It makes every public space unsafe, basically. It
has the potential to have a remarkable impact in that regard because of the jolt and the fear of it. It is the emotional response immediately of hearing about it and feeling it, if I can say that. Obviously, if we take a meta perspective and almost intellectually look at it, it is in the minority of occurrences. Again, as when I started, the majority of child rapes are not done by strangers. So this is not, to my mind and my experience, an occurrence that is readily common in this way. It is still, unfortunately, quite common, but not necessarily in this specific way. But the impact is remarkably jolting to see. It's almost a threat to everyone.
So this has become a racial issue, and an alarming tweet we showed you saying that this is not part of white culture. Somebody saying this man must have been framed. Got a lot of people angry. Let's just listen to some more of your comments. We asked if you were sympathetic or angered by that tweet. All right, while we wait for those voice notes, just let's look at some of the tweets seducing a serious rape case to culture. I can't actually read that full tweet, but just looking at this cultural claim, totally ignorant. Rape can never be anybody's culture. Black, white, yellow, green. It's bad and an unspeakable crime. Yeah, unfortunately, there's this moving away the focus from victims, from safety to race.
Absolutely. As I say, it is a very different psychological mechanism that really I can explain to you, but I will say it is so delicate because it is steeped in so much pain. I will rather give it the respect that it deserves and lay it out in full, giving it really the focus. But what I will say about this tweet, certainly the one that you're referring to that has now elicited so much frustration, we can see there no empathy is evident towards the victim, which will be the first level of an impact. The doubt, the way that it is critiqued, creates a lot of frustration because it is almost lightheartedly dismissed.
Yeah.
And the reference...
This could never be.
Yeah, please, whatever, it's obviously... You know, that has quite a jolting impact on the receiving end to read it. Then the reference to culture, there is a process message there as well, which is likely to elicit this pull in the groups of races. It is not in our culture to rape little girls. There's an implication there that perhaps it's in another one.
Yeah.
There's a bit of an attack there on a different culture as well.
Okay, and somebody else is not. All right, so those voice notes are ready. Let's take a listen.
What is really frustrating is the fact that this thing has been circling around social media for about 4 days now, whilst the rapist's identity was withheld. And next thing, there's a tweet that we must wait for DNA tests because this guy believes that, you know, the rapist was framed. For what good reason is there? So whose culture is it to rape small children? I think white people, the majority of white people are very disrespectful, and I think it's time for us to show them that.
All right, unfortunately we didn't get to the end of that, but a lot of anger. You know, we were discussing it earlier, and there's been a whole debate around whether Nelson Mandela did enough, whether the sins of white people were punished in the beginning, whether there's a repression in this country coming out in younger people who believe that maybe their parents compromised too much, dealt with white people with kid gloves. Is there a repression?
I can fully understand the frustrations here, and the question in that sense is really on a political level. Clinically speaking, we will rather look at the process and the mechanism behind it, rather than what should be done politically. That is not my area
I'm just
of
saying,
expertise.
to you, in your experience, is there this repression leading to this this anger, this hurt from both sides?
I will say, in brief, when one looks at the mechanism, this type of group dynamic mechanism, one really has to be sensitive to the fact, as I've mentioned, that even talking about it runs the risk of eliciting or making individuals feel an element of threat. Mentioning of a group, a racial group, already has the impact that, okay, but I must defend the group. What we find in the research is that because of this mechanism, individuals are pulled into different groups and immediately take the identity of the group that they are part of. We are part of numerous different groups in our life, race being perhaps one of it. And when we are members of a group, we run the risk of, well, classically groups almost immediately compete. And in that competition, which is designed to protect ourselves, we run the risk a little bit of skewing perceptions. But this is such, as I say, such a delicate issue, because There is very real, very deep pain for individuals within each one of any group. And I will say a very key element to look going forward is, instead of speaking and existing as a group, it is rather to exist as individuals. Because if a group speaks as a group, if you make a statement as a group member, it is difficult, almost impossible, for somebody in a different group to have empathy for you, to understand what your struggle is, what your pain was. But if somebody speaks as an individual and shares what they have suffered, how they feel, what their hurt is, what they experience, we can actually have empathy coming through. In that sense, we can see individuals, and we don't have to fall almost victim to the processes of battling and fighting in this way. Groups are made up of individual human beings. We are talking about real suffering, real pain, real struggles. But if we speak of it as a general group, it almost just becomes invisible in it. There's a real shame in the loss of the humanity that comes from that.
And we all feel the hurt. Let's look at Ms. Pakela. As black people, we are being racist and are stereotyping, pointing out that white people do this and that isn't appropriate. Let's just say that we are dealing with a stupid citizen that has zero humility and basic sense. I'll wait for her opinion after the court ruling. So I agree completely. This, I think, in response to that outrageous tweet suggesting that somehow rape is not part of white culture. Thank you for giving us some psychological insights. We appreciate that. Clinical psychologist Hayden Knibbs. Remember, you can view this interview, any of our interviews or features, go to sabcnews.com, our Facebook page as well. And of course, on Twitter, find us and use hashtag #FullView.